it's a little terrifying because you absolutely cannot miss.
Goalies now are completely at a premium.
Not, right? Like, Canada doesn't have a ton of great options.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Hockey News Big Show. I'm your host, Katie Gaus, joined by my co-hosts, Michael Traikos and Ryan Kennedy. And guys, free agency is officially kicked off. You grinded it out yesterday. 3 straight hours of coverage starting at the noon marker and going all the way through. And certainly we had a lot to talk about. You guys had a lot to discuss, but so much happened the day before free agency. So here on the Hockey News Big Show today, we're going to do like a recap of the maybe a few other things that have happened, because this has certainly been a little bit more unconventional. But I want to start off with, still just what has been one of the biggest stories, and it's continuing to develop because we're seeing more coming out from Vegas, and that is Mitch Marner, the sign and trade going to Vegas for Nick Waugh coming to Toronto. And let's start off with some of the things that we've seen from his press conference yesterday. Mitch Marner speaking for the first time wearing that Vegas jersey, which is going to take a lot of getting used to. I think we can all agree on that. But talking about how, what he was looking for in Vegas, the things that were good fits for him. And something that stood out to me was just like when he talks about the kind of players that he wanted to play with, like he had those players in Toronto. So I guess the first question is, what did you make of maybe what we were hearing from Marner and his thoughts on why Vegas was a good fit, Michael?
Well, some of it was confusing because you're right. He goes from Austin Matthews, who by all counts is, the greatest goal scorer, not named Alex Ovechkin, since the lockout era. Yeah. And he also has a winger in Matthew Nice who provides every single thing that you want in a third man in terms of that physicality. So you can't really fault the Toronto Maple Leafs for not surrounding him with the right kind of pieces. Mm-hmm. For me, read between the lines, and Vegas doesn't have Toronto Maple Leaf fans that are going to be bugging Mitch Marner every single time he walks his dog or goes to the grocery store or just is basically walking around town. And I think that's the major difference here. He goes from the biggest hockey market in the world to a great hockey market in terms of they put winning above everything else. But let's face it, he's going to be able to walk around Vegas pretty much in anonymity.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you think about it on paper, it's a lateral move. Both Toronto and Vegas have been fantastic teams the past 5 years. The only difference is obviously the Golden Knights have the Stanley Cup championship in their back pocket. But, for Marner, it's a fresh change of scenery. And, when he first put on that number 93 in Vegas, you could tell he was very stoked about it. And I think this is going to be sort of a new lease on life for him. Things ended on a sour note in Toronto. And now he goes almost as far as possible, right? He's going from the East to the West. He's going from Canada to the U.S., He's going from a traditional market to a new and thriving market. So it'll be interesting to see what he does on the ice, because I think a lot of the off-ice burdens are now gone.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I even saw the one clip where he talked about how he and his wife were talking to Vegas players when they were all together for Four Nations. Four Nations happened, what was that, February?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're sitting here and you're watching this as a Leafs fan, I would be dying, because it's like, okay, so in February you were already checked out? Was it sooner than that? I mean, this is becoming more and more difficult to digest, I think, when you're looking at it from a Toronto perspective. Would you agree, Michael?
Yeah, because I thought that the first kind of crack in the foundation was the trade deadline, Katie, when they apparently approached Marner about, a trade that would have included Mikko Rantanen. That was basically a month after the start of Four Nations, roughly. So to hear that he's already been thinking about this, in February, that is a bit of a shock. And it's, a bit of a gut punch, because let's face it, Toronto Maple Leafs not only lost Marner, but they didn't really replace him. Nick Roy's, a great salvageable piece that you're going to add as your third line center. And, they grabbed Matthias Michelli, who Ryan and I are already calling Matthias Marner. but he's not going to be replacing Marner's production. So, he could have went the classy route. He could have just thanked, the city of Toronto and what it meant to be a Leaf and talked about that. Instead, he was just kind of like, taking shots as he went out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you tweeted this out when it was a response to the question that Troy Living had about, are you a better team today than you were at the end of the season? And he said, today is July 1st. The season doesn't start on July 2nd. So that's all well and good. But you responded to it by saying, but who's left? And it is a great point because, again, sure, the season may not start, but what pieces are there still? Because if you're looking at this Leafs group the way it is right now, on July 2nd, are they a better team than they were at the end of the regular season? What else needs to be done? I know we've heard a lot about this change in DNA. Ryan, how do they go about that? Have they started that? What do we think?
Well, Nikolai Ehlers is still out there as we are recording this, I should say. So he would be an option as a top-line winger that Toronto could maybe go after. But, and we were talking about this yesterday, you're not going to replace Mitch Marner. He's a 100-point guy. There's only, sort of a handful of players that can claim that, maybe like 10, 12 tops in the NHL right now. Mm-hmm. But what you can do is sort of reorder your lineup in a way that might be more effective in the playoffs. I mean, the big knock on Marner was late in a series, his offense tended to dry up. So if you're not missing that anyways, but you're stronger overall defensively because of a Nick Waugh, for example, if you're still getting contributions from a Matthias Michelli, or if Easton Cowan steps up or Nick Robertson steps up, then maybe you just have a bit of a different look. And maybe your bottom six is stronger than it was. Maybe guys aren't looking specifically to one or two players to provide that offense, right? Like we always sort of think like, oh, it's the core four that needs to step up. But you hope everybody on your team wants to score late in a series. What does this mean for William Nylander? Maybe we see him continue to ascend. Matthew Nyes, who just signed his contract extension for big money. Maybe he still has another 10, 15 points that he can add to his totals, which were already trending up. It's going to be really interesting. And, if you're a Leaf fan right now, I guess your best case scenario is to think, well, Jonathan Huberdeau had like 100 points for the Florida Panthers and they traded him and then they became a juggernaut. So subtracting one player, even if it's a really good player, isn't always a death knell. But you have to be careful, obviously, if you're the Leafs, that you don't have a huge letdown.
That's a great point, Ryan, about, you were never going to replace Mitch Marner because there's not a whole lot of players that can put up 100 points and be one of the best penalty killers in the NHL. But, one other example, and we're going back here, but Joe Thornton was traded from Boston to San Jose in a year where he won the Hart Trophy. And the players that Boston got in return, like, Marco Sturm, Wayne Primo, Brad Stewart, Mike O'Connell, none of those guys were Joe Thornton. Combined, they weren't Joe Thornton. But, Boston, they won a cup after that trade, shortly after. And, the reason they made that trade wasn't because they didn't think Thornton wasn't talented or couldn't produce, because very clearly he could. They made that trade because they wanted to change the DNA of the dressing room. And if Toronto can do something similar, and I don't know who's out there that is going to really wow you, but like you mentioned, if they're better suited in the playoffs with those pieces, then we might be looking at this trade as, a necessary evil.
Let's put a bow on our discussion of Mitch Marner for now with Toronto with a question for both of you real quick. Who is getting Mitch Marner's A?
Ooh.
Is it too early for Matthew Nyes? Because he kind of feels like an important guy.
So who's got it right now? So you've got, obviously, Matthews is the captain. I believe Tavares has an A. I believe Riley has an A. Do you give it to Nylander?
Yeah. Or Tanev?
Yeah.
There's a lot of potential there. A lot of worthy candidates. Nyes, you're right, Ryan. Like, he very much looks like he's now part of the core. Like, the core four now includes Matthew Nyes in my mind because he is signed long term.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see who's getting a little extra stitching on their Leafs jersey. Let's do a little breakdown here, going through and looking at some of the overall moves from the day yesterday, and then we've had a few trickling in today as well. Nothing crazy. Some kind of finalizing last night. Most confusing move of the day. Maybe it was an amount that was handed out. Maybe it was just a player that was signed that doesn't necessarily fit the mold. Ryan, who was your head scratcher so far?
Well, I would look at the Keandre Miller situation with the Rangers in Carolina. It was a little telegraphed. We had heard for a while now that maybe the Rangers were interested in trading Keandre Miller, which to me, it's like, but he's young and talented, and you've had trouble developing young players with talent lately. And here's one that seems to be, taking hold. It ended up being a trade. Apparently, the rumor was that it was going to be an offer sheet, and the Rangers said, "Look, let's just make the deal." So I think they did all right in the trade, getting Scott Morrow and a couple of picks. But I just feel like with New York, like I don't know what the plan is right now. I don't know what the plan's been for the past year, frankly.
I was going to say, you've been saying that for a lot now, pretty much the entire season.
Still confused.
Back when they traded Jacob Trouba, you were asking that question.
Yeah.
That's a great choice. The other one I will say, I love the trade for Montreal, getting Zachary Bolduc. I just don't understand it for St. Louis. Like, here's a guy who had a breakout year, 19 goals, 36 points. He's young. He's, a talented winger. This is the kind of guy that you'd expect that is very much a part of the Blues' future. Instead, they flipped him for Mayu, who, I guess there's potential there. This is a AHL All-Star. He put up a ton of points as a defenseman. Obviously came with some controversy behind him heading into his draft year with some off-ice stuff, but I like the deal from, like I said, Montreal's standpoint. I thought they were a clear winner at the draft, but from St. Louis's, why not hang on to Bolduc? This guy was just scratching the surface.
Well, let's talk about Montreal a little bit, because I've seen a lot online, people feeling like they are one of the teams that would be considered, winners so far here, particularly from the defensive side of things, saying they may have one of the best defenses now in the NHL. What are you kind of, anticipating from them from a paper perspective of what we're seeing this team could be shaping up to look like? Because they already took huge strides, this season, especially towards the end, making into the playoffs. Is this a team that really is going to be one to watch?
I think so. I think they've guaranteed that it's not going to be a one and done for them. Like what we saw last year out of them, whether you wanted to call it a fluke or they overachieved, by grabbing Dobson, now by grabbing Bolduc. And just with the natural maturation that we're going to see out of their young guys, whether it's Slavkovsky or Demidov, Montreal should be one of those teams that for sure is a wild card team. And it wouldn't even surprise me. I don't know if it would surprise you, Ryan. Do you see them as a top 3 team in the Atlantic? And that's pretty tough to say, because there's some pretty good teams there.
Yeah.
I think just by virtue of Toronto, Tampa, Florida, they're probably not going to be top 3, but I think they would be a very safe number 4 and a very safe wild card team. If this year was any indication, there was kind of like, a couple of wild card teams where it's like, all right, they're definitely in. And then, the last wild card had to kind of scramble. But what I like about Montreal's moves so far, and you make a great point about just all that internal growth, is, from the Four Nations break on, they were super hot. And Nick Suzuki in particular was super hot. So now you're taking a lineup that had a lot of momentum going into the summer, and you added, right? Like, Noah Dobson is going to be a difference maker, and he's going to take pressure off of Lane Hudson, because we know all eyes are going to be on Lane Hudson when teams are doing their pre-scout. He's the Calder Trophy winner. He had obviously an amazing rookie season. Now there's going to be more pressure, but now it's not just him with that high-end puck-moving skill. Now you have Noah Dobson as well, who can log a bunch of minutes, who can maybe take some focus away from Hudson. And exactly, like Demidov, a great young player that we're just starting to see the beginnings of what he can be. Slavkovsky getting a lot more confidence last season. So assuming that they don't like run into injury trouble or, somebody takes a step back, I think Montreal, they have a lot of great elements now. And, they're not a complete team. Everybody's been talking about can they get an upgrade at number 2 center? And there's time for that, right? I mean, even if you don't have one right away, there's always trades in season. There's always the trade deadline. If you want to make a splash, we know Montreal has made a lot of draft picks lately. I'm sure they have a lot of draft picks still going forward from when they were rebuilding. So I think the Habs are in a really good situation right now.
By the way, I think it's funny that you still think Toronto's a guaranteed top 3 team.
Oh.
I'm not sold on it. I am
Really?
not sold. I'm really.
With Stolars and Wool in net, with that defense, with Matthews, Nylander, Nyes, Tavares up top, you're worried?
I'm not so much worried about Toronto, Ryan. I'm more worried about how close Ottawa is and how close Montreal is. And I think it's just a virtue of, again, we keep saying Atlantic, I think, is the toughest division. And I think they're just so top heavy where those 5 teams could very well be separated by, maybe 8 points when the season is done. And maybe that's why Toronto just becomes a wildcard team. I don't think they're missing the playoffs, but I think the difference between the number 3 seed in the wildcard team might be only like a win.
Yeah. Or it's definitely going to be close. I think the Atlantic has become a juggernaut. We mentioned the Leafs. So with the departure of Marner, they are now passing the torch of this core 4 to the Edmonton Oilers, because with that Bouchard signing, we now have a whole lot of dudes making a whole lot of money on this Edmonton team. Draisaitl, McDavid, Bouchard, and Nurse. That's the new core 4. And so assuming that things continue the way they have forever, which is them facing the LA Kings in the first round, LA has done a lot. I have this whole list of LA signings, dudes coming in from all over. A lot of older guys, though. So, you've got this core 4 taking up all this money in Edmonton. You've got LA bringing in all these older players. The Cody Ceci contract has a lot of people very upset. 4 years at $4.5 million. So I guess between these two on paper right now, is there any advantage in either direction? What are we thinking of this new LA and this new Edmonton? Well, maybe it's not a new Edmonton, but things are certainly going to be interesting there.
I thought LA was better than Edmonton last year.
Yeah.
When going into the playoffs, I was predicting, I think many of us were predicting LA was going to beat Edmonton. So I think they're even better. And I think Edmonton is probably a little worse. They lost a lot of depth. When we talk about our winners and losers, Edmonton is one of those teams that I've got as a loser because of how many surrounding pieces they did lose. But this was Ken Holland putting the stamp on the LA Kings, like it or not. Like Ken Holland, he goes in there and he doesn't do the flashy moves all the time. It's a lot of these. All right, I got some veteran guys. I got us some depth. I got us some players that I believe in, and he gets criticized all the time for these kind of moves. But then you'll probably see the LA Kings now make their big jump, and they're finally going to get over the hump, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, first of all, yesterday on our Free Agent Frenzy Live, I thought Marco Sturm was the new coach of Los Angeles. He's not. He's Boston's new coach. It's still Jim Hiller. So I apologize.
I changed my mind now on LA.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of wonder, first of all, GMs love Cody Ceci just as much as people on the internet hate Cody Ceci.
It's so fascinating.
So the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. But I think what's interesting is if you look at all the moves the Kings made yesterday, it almost feels like they are girding to play the Oilers again in the first round, and they are trying to build like an anti-Oilers machine. So they get Corey Perry, so now they don't have to play against Corey Perry, who was excellent for the Oilers in the playoffs. They get Armia, who is a very solid defensive forward. Whatever you think about Cody Ceci, he's big and he has a ton of experience. And Brian Dumoulin, same deal. Who do they move out? Jordan Spence, who's talented but pretty small. What do we know about playoff success? You want a big D-core. You look at Florida, and with the exception of like Nate Schmidt, the Panthers' blue line was really big. If you think about Mikkola, Ekblad, Jones, Gustav Forsling he's not towering, but he's super strong. If you talk to the Panthers, I think they call him Adonis. He's like the strongest guy on the team. So
God carved up every ounce of muscle you can imagine.
Exactly. So, you bring in all these guys and, they're not like at the top of your depth chart, but they're the guys where when you get into what you hope to be a long series, can still give you minutes. And, when McDavid and Draisaitl are coming at you constantly, at least you've got some sort of, cannon fodder for them to get in their way and to make things hard for them, which is something that really only the Florida Panthers have figured out in the past 2 years in the playoffs.
No, it's great points. And, Corey Perry might be the sneaky acquisition of the entire summer because Katie just mentioned you get Corey Perry, you're not going to win a cup, but you're going to at least get into the final.
You're going to the final.
You're getting really close. So do not pass go. Just park Corey Perry in the final. The problem is he never wins when he's there. But eventually, right, the law of averages suggests that Corey Perry has to win one of these times that he's in this cup final. So maybe it is with LA. We'll see. All right, well, how about this? If you have to go, we'll just go east and west to kind of keep it simple here. Which team improved the most from each conference as it stands right now?
Yeah. Ryan, who do you like for improved the most?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at the
it doesn't mean like that, like this team is going to like be. And we're talking about just improvements overall. Like they don't have.
I think it's hard, from the West. Like I'm just gonna go back to Vegas. Like, how do you not say that the Vegas Golden Knights improved when they just added Mitch Marner to a team that didn't need to add Mitch Marner? Like that was a very good team. I know Alex Pietrangelo is gonna miss the season, but do we expect them to be there for game one of the playoffs? I do. I don't know if everyone else does. Maybe I'm just a cynic, but I see this as an 82-game rest, and then he'll be ready. But again, you add Marner to a team that already had Eichel and all the offensive weapons that they had. That's a scary team. Like it's very hard to see on paper a better team than Vegas right now.
I'm concerned about the Golden Knights' defensive depth. I don't think Pietrangelo's going to come back for the playoffs. Maybe I'm naive, but again, we talked about this yesterday. I don't think he would put himself in a position to miss the Olympics just to make another Stanley Cup run. But I'm definitely looking at LA in the West as most improved, but I would also say like Anaheim getting Granlund,
yes,
and then obviously earlier, getting Chris Kreider. I am kind of intrigued by the Ducks. Like, I'm not saying that they're going to be one of the best teams. I don't even know if they're a playoff team, but I think they've done a lot to improve. And even in trading John Gibson, like Lucas Dostal was their starter anyways at this point. So I don't think they're taking a step back in net. If anything, we might even see Lucas Dostal be even better because, I mean, I think he's still on the rise as a net minder. And then if you look at the East, Montreal would be an obvious one, but Detroit, in getting John Gibson and some of the other little moves they made, I'm wondering if this was enough to get over the hump, like retaining Patrick Kane. I think they got JVR as well, so they got a little more veteran experience there. I think Gibson will make a whole lot of difference. And then when you get the internal growth of an Edvinson, a Marco Kasper, I think that could be enough. But I have been burned by the Yzer plan before. So
the other team that I think made huge strides, and Ryan and I talked about this the other day, was Utah. And the Mammoth, made some mammoth picks or acquisitions. And it started with JJ Peterka, who, I think the value that Buffalo got in return for Peterka, again, we can talk about Marner and how sort of, I don't want to say lopsided, but just how strange that one was in losing him and not getting anything back. I would say the same thing about Utah. Like, I don't think they got for Buffalo, I don't think they got nearly enough for Peterka. But then the Mammoth also signing Nate Schmidt, that's a defense that was banged up, obviously, last year with Marino. But now you add Schmidt to, back end that obviously is led by Sergachev. Getting Vanacek, I think, was a sneaky good move for a backup goaltender because, we know Karl Vermelka is, solid, but he's going to need some guy to help him out there. So, the Utah Mammoth, similar to what Ryan's saying about Detroit and getting over the hump, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mammoths grab one of those wildcard spots.
And Tanev too, right? Like that's another piece.
Brandon Tanev.
Forgot about Tanev. Yeah,
plays to like an identity that you want. He is the kind of guy that you would want for the playoffs. They call him Turbo, right? I mean, he just never stops working, never stops moving, and he's kind of like a wrecking ball out there when he's going. So certainly Utah is definitely an interesting team to keep an eye on. All right, well, was there anyone that you feel like is just having a lot of regrets right now, like whether they had control over their situation or not? You're just not sure what they're doing at this point.
Edmonton for me is, I don't know if they have regret, but it just seems like with every passing year, that championship window gets, it closes another inch. And I still think, Edmonton's going to be a dangerous team because they still got McDavid, still got Draisaitl, and obviously now they got Bouchard signed up. But, I didn't like what Ekholm looked like when he came back. And I think age is starting to creep up there. But you look at all the depth players that they just lost, whether it's Connor Brown, Victor Arvidsson, help me out, Ryan. There was a lot of forwards that kind of went by the wayside. Evander Kane, that's a lot of offense. Now, Corey Perry had 10 playoff goals. Well, Kane had like another 5 or 7. How do you replace that now? Like, it can't just be McDavid and Draisaitl. You do need depth. And, the way that the salary is structured in Edmonton, you're really kind of relying on 3 players to just produce constantly. And it's too much. And, Matthew Tkachuk said it after winning in Game 6. He's like, it very much seemed like they were always looking at McDavid to do things when they got in trouble, whereas we're a team. And, if it wasn't me, it was Barkov. If it wasn't Barkov, it was Reinhart or Bennett or Verhaeghe or, Marchand, or the list goes on and on and on. And Edmonton doesn't have that luxury now.
Yeah, I would look at the Buffalo Sabres, and in dealing Peterka, one of their better scorers, and not really making a lot of improvement. I think they're going to look around and be like, ooh, we're not making the playoffs again. And our fans are going to be
do anything. I mean,
yeah, like they re-signed Ryan McLeod, which is something. But I would be very worried that the Sabres are heading for another palm tree apocalypse with their fans, especially because, Montreal got better. Ottawa was already better than Buffalo. Detroit got a little better. And at least, with teams like Pittsburgh and Philly that didn't do anything earth-shattering, I kind of want to see like how it plays out, because if Pittsburgh continues to strip away and rebuild, I'm all for it. I think that's the way to go. With Philly, they want to take that next step. Are they ready to take that next step? I'm not sure, but I think that, there's at least some goodwill there in terms of, some of the drafting that they've done in the past couple of years has been very strong. So at least Flyers fans can say like, all right, well, we got Mitchkov, now Porter Martone is in the pipeline. Like, this will be a fun team in a couple of years. There's something to look forward to. Hopefully they're not too impatient, because I don't know if we'll see the Flyers in the mix, but I think that's okay, at least for one more year. Do
you think the Buffalo Sabres take a run at Ehlers, Ryan? And if they get Ehlers, does it change your mind about how the free agency has gone, or is that just one piece and they need more than that?
I mean, it's an interesting hypothetical, but if you're Nikolai Ehlers, do you want to go to Buffalo when, Like
You're already in Winnipeg. I mean, it's
basically it's the American Winnipeg, isn't it?
The American Winnipeg, yeah. Well, he wouldn't need new outfits, which is nice. But yeah, there's probably like 10 teams still in the hunt for Ehlers. So I think he's going to have his pick where,
Colorado.
He would probably prefer to go to a winner, right? Like if you're the number one free agent on the board right now, and you can pick between a team that is struggling and a guaranteed playoff team, maybe one that has nicer weather. I don't know. You probably go elsewhere unless like Buffalo super overpaid him.
Well, you'd have to.
That's probably not good for anybody.
No. And I think that's what kind of screwed up this free agency is like not having a Brock Besser available. Now it's everyone's in on Ehlers, and like, Granlund's also off the board. So there really isn't a whole lot of pieces. Like, if it's not Ehlers, I don't know who else it would be. And you're right. If Buffalo comes out of this without adding a significant piece, I don't know how they move on, because they're looking at another rebuild, a third rebuild in like 15 years.
Unless they get Gavin McKenna. If they get Gavin McKenna in the draft, then I think Sabres fans would be like, all is forgiven.
I know, but how many first overall picks have they had, Ryan? It still hasn't worked out.
I know. Hey, just look at Edmonton. Eventually, it gets better. If you make like 6 number one overall picks, eventually you will get Connor McDavid, and things will be all right.
Well, we'll talk about who might be getting McKenna just one second. I do want to talk about one more team because I'm seeing a lot of chatter online about them, and I am just fascinated at what they are doing right now. I don't understand it at all. That is the Boston Bruins. They have assembled the greatest bottom 6, except for they're all in the top. Like they're everywhere. Who's left? I mean, they literally have so many depth players, but now who are their stars? Like, who's actually driving this team outside of Pastrnak and McAvoy? So, what are your thoughts on what Boston's been doing? Because I know we were kind of pegging them as a team that could be right back in the playoff mix, right? Like they had this year off, like it was kind of a surprise. Things just didn't click. They had the coaching change, whatever. But now I'm less convinced that they are ready to get right back into the playoff mix more than I ever have been. Again, maybe this is more just about what everyone around them is doing, but they've made some really confusing moves in my opinion as well. Ryan, what do you think?
Okay, now that I know that Marco Sturm is Boston's coach, I can say that they will be very structured, and maybe they can grind out a wild card spot. But I'm with you, Katie. Like I don't think this is the Bruins team that we're used to. We talked about this yesterday. Like they don't have very good depth at center. Elias Lindholm would be their de facto number one, and that's not really his strength. Pavel Zacha has played a scoring role as well, and they made it work, but it's not ideal again. I think this is a team that like essentially they just kind of have to wait a year for James Higgins, or maybe James Higgins like blows the doors off of them at training camp. But I guess he wouldn't even go to training camp because he's still at Boston College. So unless they make a decision really early on, I would expect him. What?
Yeah. Would you do that though with a guy like Higgins and where Boston
I would
is?
wait.
Like it does feel like they are.
I would let him, get more muscle in the weight room at BC. I would tell him to be the driver for Boston College, because the one thing to remember is when he played with Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault, the knock, and this was even coming from Ryan Leonard, was that early on in the season, James Higgins was too deferential. And then as time goes on, they were like, speak up. Like, we want to communicate. Like, you're part of this line. We know you're the young guy, but you're super smart and super talented. So, get in there. And Higgins started to do that. So now you get a situation where, his line mates are gone. This should be Higgins' Eagles team. So that's a really good opportunity for him to grow as a young player and as a center. So I do believe that he should play one more year at Boston College. But then he would basically step in as their number one center, just based on his profile. So I do feel that this is kind of going to be like a transition year for the Bruins. It might be kind of ugly. maybe David Pastrnak can just kind of will them to a lot of offense because he is so talented and he is one of those 100-point plus players. But yeah, you got Swayman, you got McAvoy, you got Pastrnak, and that's kind of your hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think Boston is probably, I thought it was just going to be a 1 year, they just, 1 year retool as Boston likes to do, but it very much looks like they're now in it for at least 2, maybe 3 years before they make that jump again. They did have the salary cap space. It's just, all the pieces just kept coming off the board. Like I thought a Brock Besser would have been perfect for Boston. Now, I know he's not a center, but just giving them that extra punch. It's difficult because again, they're in the Atlantic, and if you're just gonna be a mediocre team, you're probably better off just recouping as many picks over the next couple of years. And Pastrnak is still, he's not young, but he's still relatively young. Same thing with McAvoy. Obviously, you got Swayman, so you do have the 3 pieces there where it's not that hard to build around them when you decide to pull the trigger.
I like it. All right. Well, before we get into some rapid fire, a reminder that you don't need to break the bank on sticks when you can get a pro level composite stick without the pro price tag at sticks.com. Make sure to check it out. That's stix.com. So go over there, see what they got for you. All right. Rapid fire. Let's kick things off with each of you telling me which team on paper looks like they are fully embracing the miserable for McKenna campaign. This year, Ryan.
I'll go Chicago. They really didn't do anything, and they were already terrible. So yeah, the Hawks, they're in it.
Yeah, for me, it's either the Blackhawks or the Sharks. Ryan went Blackhawks, so I'll say the Sharks. They had, I think, 5 fewer wins than the Blackhawks this year. They're going to be a fun team to watch. I think they're going to just be, you're going to enjoy watching them lose because of all the talent they have up front. And, now that they've got Michael Misa coming in a couple of years, that Sharks team, pencil them in for 2027-28 because that's when they're going to make their move.
Right, I like it. We're going to go back and forth here. I'm going to name a team. Again, this is obviously on paper with where they stand right now, and you're going to tell me playoff team, yes or no. So we'll start with you, Michael. Anaheim.
No.
All right, here we go. Ryan.
You need a reason?
Nope. I just want to go through here. We talked about Anaheim a little bit as well already, right? Where they're at. All right, Ryan. How about this one for you? Vancouver.
Ooh, I'm gonna say yes. I think they stabilize.
Yeah.
Okay, you can tell us a little more. We didn't get into Vancouver a ton.
Yeah, I just think that last year was such a nightmare for them, and there was so many distractions, and now that's sort of settled. And the fact that they re-signed all their guys was surprising, and I think probably kind of heartening for the fan base because, I mean, Brock Besser is a super talented guy, and I'm sure that there was a lot of distractions, and I think he can get back to being, like he should be like a 30, 35 goal guy every year. And I think, Pettersson will be better. Demko obviously needs to be healthy, but when he is, he's a top flight goaltender.
Yeah, I'm going to add, they got good vibes, Ryan. The vibes are finally looking good for Vancouver. Not much has changed in terms of last year's team from this year's, but I just think, new coach, obviously JT Miller, all that soap opera dramas behind them, and then they got all the guys to re-sign. I just feel like this is going to be the return of the Canucks, and yeah, I'm agreeing with you. 100% they're a playoff team.
And they got Evander Kane. I mean, what better vibes could you get?
Ooh,
oh, wait.
I changed my mind on the vibes.
Wait a minute. Well, guess what? Maybe a new scenery. I don't know. That one's going to be an interesting one. All right, here you go. Last one on paper, Michael. New York Rangers playoff team.
So Ryan and I were talking about this. I'm going to say yes. But yeah, I'm going to say yes. And I think they have to be top 3 in their division to be a playoff team, just because I think, and Ryan and I were talking about this yesterday, the 2 wild cards we could see coming out of the Atlantic, not the Metro. Mm-hmm. So, for New York, you got to be one of the top 3 teams in the Metro. And I say, yeah, they do it.
All right, here we go. Last 2 I'm going to ask. These ones are just better or worse. We haven't really gotten a chance to talk about these guys as much. Ryan, Dallas Stars.
They're a little worse. Yeah, losing Mason Marchment hurts. And then losing Granlund hurts as well. He was very good for them in the playoffs.
Yeah, they're a bit older now too. Like they brought back Ben and
Aren't we
Sagan.
all?
Like, yeah,
Every day.
Every
Every
day.
day. What about do we like the coaching decision? Is that going to make an impact at all for Dallas?
Gulletson. Yeah,
It was kind of underwhelming.
Yeah.
Right?
I was a big DeBoer fan up until that decision. It doesn't mean he's a bad
Right.
coach, but it's hard to move on from Pete DeBoer and say you got a better coach because I still think he's, I don't know how you rank coaches, but he's at the top, near the top at least.
Yeah, Gulletson will help the power play. That's for sure. He's very good when it comes to that.
Last one. We'll end it on a high note here because I think I already know the answer. Better or worse? Florida Panthers. How could they get better? They're already the best.
Well, they're better in the sense that they didn't have Seth Jones or Brad Marchand for the regular season, and I think that alone makes them better. They upgraded the backup goalie position, which when you've got Bobrovsky, does that really matter? And sometimes it does. I guess he's played a lot of hockey, so having a guy that you can rely on for spot duty or at least 30 games might make a big difference as well.
I mean, I guess technically they're worse just because they'll be banged up. But I would also say I already know that if they win the Stanley Cup for a third straight year, based on their culture, we now know that Jeff Petrie will get the first pass of the cup because he has not won one before. So that's like, hey, that's easy.
In with one D, out with another. They just keep recycling these guys that are just looking for those cups, just trying to get it going. It's a place where obviously the guys love to play based on some of the team friendly deals that we saw. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you are worse for wear, but I think probably better because they're just rolling. I don't know. Nothing's going to stop them. Everything keeps rolling. The one thing I will say that's interesting, and I've seen people talking about this, is like, do you fall in love with guys too much? Like you can't keep the band together always. Maybe you get too attached to your own players. But again, I don't know if that really applies to this situation because I just think they have something so good going on there. And the culture is key. So we'll see what happens. All right, guys. Well, between yesterday and your 3-hour-long frenzy and today, we've certainly got a lot of coverage on free agency. We'll see what happens with the very few big names that are left on the board as free agency kind of continues here. But that does it for this episode of the Hockey News Big Show. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. Make sure to keep following along on Twitter, checking out all the articles we've got from all of our team sites who will be covering the newest additions to their teams. I'm Katie Gaus, but for Ryan Kennedy and Michael Traikos, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys really soon.